Hi, Charlie Kasorik, Jack Bench Woodworking, and today I'm going to talk about basic veneering techniques. Some of the fundamental things you need to know in order to do veneer work. Veneer is a fantastic product. There are so many cool things you can do with it, and it's not that difficult to do once you know how. So stick with me and I'll show you exactly how I do my veneering. I want to qualify just a little bit that there are a lot of different ways of doing it. I'm going to show you what works for me. I learned from what I think is one of the best guys in town, in the country actually, for veneer work. And so these are good proven methods, and I'll show you the tools and some of the tricks along the way. So let's get started. So the first thing I want to start from the very beginning here. This is veneer, and when you buy veneer, it comes in a sequence. That's if you buy it from a reputable dealer, that is. It'll come in sequence. And what I mean by that is when veneer is cut off of a log, they have a big log on a huge machine and they slice it with a knife. There's no kerf. It's sliced with a knife, and the sheets come off, one, then the next, and the suppliers will keep those in order, in sequence. And so when you get your bundle of veneer, it will be in sequence in the order that it was cut off of the tree. So one of the first thing that I do when I get veneer is I number it. What I do is I number them in multiple different spots. I like to put a number in the middle and on the corners. That's because it's easy to lose track of the numbers, because as you're working with the veneer, you'll be cutting it up, and sometimes the number where you have it marked is on the waste piece. So you'll be putting your veneer together, and all of a sudden you don't know which number is which anymore because the numbering is on the waste piece. So I number it in multiple locations, and that way I'm less likely to lose track of which of my sequence. Well, for this demonstration, I'm using some mahogany veneer that is about 6 inches wide and 37 inches long. And the panel that I'm going to be making is 17 by 24. So I only need 3 sheets of veneer for this, and I'll take the first 3 off of the bundle that I have. Okay, now when we're cutting your veneer, there are a couple of things you need to know about cutting the veneer. First of all, I typically use a utility knife, and I use a fixed blade utility knife instead of a retractable knife because the blades are tighter in the body of the knife and sometimes a little more accurate than a retractable knife. I do not happen to have a veneer saw. And veneer saw, I think there are times when a veneer saw I think would be handy, and I think I might get one, but up until now I've gotten by with just a utility knife. That's all I use. I'm not going to cut it down to the full length yet. I'm just going to get it in the ballpark. I need 24 inches, so I'm going to cut this 26. That's close enough for now. So what I do when I'm cutting my veneer is I use a cutting mat, and this is just a fabric, a cutting mat for sewing. So you can get these anywhere, Amazon. I'll have a link in the description for one that you could get on Amazon if you wanted to look at that. And so then I use a straight edge and a utility knife, like I said. And with the straight edge, it's just an aluminum ruler. But what I do is special with this is I put some PSA sandpaper on the back so that when I put the straight edge across the veneer, it stays tight and it doesn't move around. It's very helpful. PSA sandpaper is great stuff. So what you do is you just take the knife and you make several, push the straight edge down tight, and you cut on the offcut side. In other words, I want this ruler to be pressing down on the side that I'm keeping, and that helps to protect that side from getting chipped and torn up. But anyway, so I'll press this down, and I'll make multiple light passes across here until it comes free. Now my waste pieces are still labeled, and my keeper pieces are labeled. So I'm not going to talk about book matching here today at all. Regardless, I'll lay the veneer up, lay it together the way I would want it to look. When working with veneer, you want the joints where the two pieces come together to be nice and tight without any gaps, just like you would with solid wood. So before I can assemble these sheets of veneer together, I need to clean up the edges. And the first step in cleaning up the edges is to take my straight edge and cut a nice straight line. Okay, now what I do after I cut it and before I will try to tape the veneer together, what I'll do is I joint the edge of the veneer, because when I cut it, it's still not perfect. I run my finger along here and I can feel maybe a little bump or a little roughness. So what I do is I joint the edges with a kind of a shooting board. I take just a scrap of wood to hold the veneer up off the table, off the bench, and I overhang the veneer a little bit off the edge there of the scrap. I take another scrap I put on top of there, and then I have this square aluminum tubing with some more PSA sandpaper onto it, and I set that on my bench and I just rub it back and forth like this. You don't want to sand no more than necessary though, just enough to clean it up. All right, so once I have the edges prepped and I'm ready to start assembling the veneer. So what I'll do is I'll put a little bit of blue tape on the back side of the panel just to hold it in place temporarily. And the thing with this masking tape is the masking tape has just a tiny bit of stretch in it, and so you can actually pull the veneer tight with the tape. So I'll press it down onto one side and then I'll pull it tight, and that actually clamps it together very nicely. So once I have it temporarily taped together with blue painter's tape on the back, I'll flip it over. Now I'll put some veneer tape on the show side. Now veneer tape, I'll talk a little bit about what veneer tape is. Veneer tape is this paper, very thin paper tape, and it's got some kind of a glue on here. It's not actually fish glue anymore. I think it used to be fish glue. And you can get all sorts of different varieties of this. I usually just use about 3/4 inch, half 3/4 inch solid veneer tape. And you can get this at any veneer supplier, Amazon. I'll have a link again in the description of where you can get this veneer tape at. This is just a little tiny project. If I was doing a lot, I might have a little bowl here with a sponge, and I would run the tape across that sponge as I pulled it off of there to moisten the tape. But this is such a small little panel, I'm not even going to bother with that. I'll just cut some tape off, and here's my substrate. Now, talk about substrates. I try, when I can, to use MDF for a substrate. MDF gets a bad rap. It's an excellent substrate for veneering, just excellent. You can use plywood. Honestly, I don't think plywood is as good as MDF. It's not quite as stable, but people still use plywood. Plywood is stronger, so I'll give it that. But I try to use MDF when possible. You can veneer over solid wood too. Nothing wrong with that. A lot of times that's a nice way to go. If you want to put a nice fancy finish on a solid piece of wood, and so you might have a walnut drawer and you put walnut burl across the front. It's a nice way to go. Next, I cut the veneer down to its final length, and I actually use the MDF substrate as a template and as a cutting guide. Okay, so now once the veneer is all prepped and ready to go, you're ready to press it onto your substrate. There are a couple of different ways you could press it. Most typically, people will use a vacuum bag like the one I have here. You can buy these commercially. You can even make your own. Or you don't even have to necessarily use a bag. For something, even something this small, this large I should say, you could use a press. You could do something yourself. You could put some cawls across here and put a lot of clamps on it, and it would be just fine. But like I said, I've got a nice veneer bag, and that's what I use. So using the veneer bag, I'll talk about that. Like I said, it's just two pieces of plastic that are seamed on three edges, and one edge is open. And there'll be some kind of a fitting on the bag where you can attach a vacuum pump. The vacuum pump that I use is it's just an old refrigeration pump that I got off of eBay for, I think it was $150, something like that. So that's the pump I use, that's the bag I use. And let me talk about glue for a minute here. So there are a lot of different glues you could use for veneering. I typically just use regular white glue. I like white glue because it has a longer open time typically than yellow glue, just a little bit. But yellow glue is a great choice too. You can buy a dedicated veneer glue, PVA, polyvinyl acetate, white glue that's called veneer glue, and it's not the same as white glue. And the biggest difference with the dedicated veneer glue and a regular white glue is that the veneer glue will have fillers in it. It's thicker and heavier. The glue is less likely to seep through the veneer with the dedicated veneer glue than it is with, say, a white glue, because with the vacuum, it'll suck that glue right up through the veneer. And sometimes that's not a problem, sometimes it is a problem. So if you're concerned about that, then maybe you should get dedicated veneer glue, and you can get that at different supply houses too. But beyond that, some people use hide glue, valid choice. There's a urea glue that's very popular for veneering. It has a very long open time. It's a little harder to handle. There's some toxicity issues with it. But again, urea glue is very popular. Usually, when you're veneering on a panel, especially something thin like this MDF, you would want to veneer both sides, because if you only veneer one side, the stresses from the grain movement from the wood veneer on that one side can pull and warp the panel. So typically you want to veneer both sides to balance it out and have much less likely that you're going to have problems with warping. So I've got, like I said, this mahogany that we've been working with today for the one side. For the other side, I have a piece of walnut burl, four-way book match walnut burl that I'm going to put on the opposite side. And I'll have another video coming out very soon about how I do the four-way book match. Actually, I'm doing this is a whole series of veneering technique videos, and this four-way book match is going to be coming out shortly. So that's what you want to do for pressing it. Another thing is, when you put the veneer in the bag, it's possible for the bag to press so tightly against the panel that it can't suck air out of the rest of the bag, because it'll plug up right there. So in order to help the air get pulled out of the entire bag across the whole panel, people will put something across the top of the panel. Some people will use a bath towel. That's enough to allow the air to move through up to the hose. And what I use usually is some cloth window screen. This stuff works really well. It's easy to put in there. It's cheap. And so that's what I do. Oh, and another thing is, you always apply your glue onto the substrate. You never apply the glue to the veneer itself when you're doing this, because the water in the glue, the moisture in the glue can start to affect the veneer and start to move and warp on you before you can get it into the bag even. So you want to apply the glue onto the substrate. Once I spread the glue, then I quickly moved and set the veneer onto the substrate on both sides, and I used just a little bit of tape around the edges to hold the veneer in place while I moved it into the bag. As soon as I get it in the bag, I cover the top of the panel with the mesh window screen material. I seal the end of the bag, hook the pump up, and turn it on. I always kind of like to watch as the bag flattens out from the vacuum. With the white glue, it needs to be in the bag at least 20 to 25 minutes, but I usually leave it in there longer, 45 minutes, sometimes an hour. There it is. To remove the veneer tape, I dampen it just a little bit with the moist rag. This will soften the glue enough that I can peel most of the white tape off just with my fingers. I'll remove the rest of it with a scraper, and then finally the rest of it when I sand the panel. I'm always very eager to see how the piece is going to look with the finish on it, so I put a little shellac on there just to see how it's going to look. Okay, so here's my final product. I have this beautiful mahogany panel now, and this is just the very beginning of the things you can do with veneer. I mean, the possibilities are endless. So I hope you like this. If you had any questions, any comments, please leave them down below. I would love to hear what you thought about this. And as always, like, share, subscribe, and thanks for watching.